I want to welcome you all today to Start Fresh Student Self-Management. And the first thing I want to encourage you to do is reach out and get your free copy of this e-guide, because this is going to cover the things that we talk about in class and a little bit more. So it's not going to be able to answer your questions specifically the way we can in class, but it will definitely help you. And you'll be able to find that at the link in the description. This e-guide helps parents to understand how to train independence. And that's what we're talking about today, because student self-management is really important. So parents know it's important. We were talking earlier, and we know that we need to reduce our workload a little bit. Having multiple children and homeschooling, we need to find a way to get them to be more responsible for their own tasks. But just in life, it's really important for students as they learn and grow to be able to take on more and more of their own tasks. And we recognize this when our kids are really young. But somehow something happens, or it did for me, and I think it does for many parents. As they get older, we forget that we need to relinquish some of that to them, and we need to let them take the reins and take the lead in some things. And when we have our young kids and they're learning things, we expect them to fail. But somehow when they become preteens and teens, we want them just to pick up the gauntlet and run and not struggle. So as parents, is that something that you have seen in your journey, that when your kids were young, you expected them to struggle and fail, but then as they got older, you kind of expected that if it's difficult or if they're struggling, that they must not be ready?
Yes, I kind of felt that way with Bryce. I just kind of assumed, oh, he's in high school now, he's going to be fine. But he definitely requires more follow up than what I thought.
Hmm. And sometimes I know when our students are struggling, we just think, well, maybe I'm making it too hard, or maybe I'm expecting too much. But,
Yes.
the teen years are so hard. So enter the crazy teen years. When our kids are young, they're emotional and we expect it. And then they sort of gain some emotional control, or hopefully they do. Hopefully they've learned to manage their emotions to some degree, and they don't hit and bite and do all of the things that young children do. But then we come in to the age of preteens, and we had imagined that by then they would just continue that process, and somehow they would gain more and more control, and all of a sudden everything falls apart and they turn into these emotional tornadoes that kind of run through our lives and our house and cause so much disturbance. So in the teen and preteen years, things get a little bit crazy and the emotions get a little bit crazy, and their brains start to rewire, and things that they used to know or used to know how to know, all of a sudden they struggle with. I know my kids, I used to be able to give them when they were young, like even by 5, 6 years old, 3, 4, 5, 6 tasks, and they would go and do them all. Then all of a sudden they turned like 9 years old or 10 years old, and you'd give them 2 tasks and they'd get lost on their way to find the first thing. So it's really a struggle when we're concerned. We don't know what's happening. We don't understand why this is happening. Have you noticed your kids somehow when they enter the preteen or teen years that things just get a little bit crazy? Maybe you just want to pop in the chat there and tell me, what's it looking like in your house in these crazy teen years? Is this something that you are identifying with? Okay, we're still in the preteen years, but he's acting like an airhead. Yes, all of a sudden their minds just seem empty. Like we can't understand what happened to all those brilliant ideas and all that motivation that they used to have when they were young. Yes, definitely what you just described is my 10-year-old. The number of distractions have seemed to increase when she's tasked with something, of course. So this is a period when their brains are rewiring. So all of the tasks that they used to know how to do, their brains are creating new neural pathways, and they almost have to relearn a lot of things, which to us just seems so frustrating. So we become overwhelmed and we become frustrated. Then all of a sudden, all those crazy emotions that they're throwing out at us, we tend to throw them right back. Or that's my experience. Maybe you're not as emotional as I am, but is that something you identify with? Just pop a 1 in the chat if that's something you identify with, that the emotions that they have when they get upset, when they get frustrated, when they get angry, it spews out at us, and we sort of reflect the same thing right back to them. Yes, exactly. Yep, thank you for sharing. Perfect. Oh, it's so hard to remember that we're the adult. You give them a list, but they don't remember to check the list. Of course, of course, of course. Yes, exactly. And we're going to talk about lists today because lists are one way that we can do this. And there are a few others maybe that we can use to help our students. But the strategies are so much more than a list. So what we have happening in the preteen and teen years eventually turns into a struggle for power. So initially it's their brain rewiring and they become kind of empty-headed, like you said, Jessica, kind of airheaded. They get lost on the way to a task. They forget what they're doing. They forget the list. They kind of they just wander into space. But as they get a little bit older, we end up with this struggle for power. And I'm going to make a rather maybe inept example of horse training and student training. So your students are, of course, not at all like a horse. However, the struggle for power between the rider and a horse and a parent and a teen is quite similar. So as they're growing older, it's just natural that they want and expect more autonomy. We expect that when they're 3 and 4 years old and they want to tie their own shoes, but somehow they don't want to pick up their toys. They want to do the pieces that they want to do, but they don't want to be responsible for the things that we give them responsibility for. And we see that amplified in the teen years. So they're growing, they need autonomy. It's actually part of their neurodevelopment. It's part of their growth process to expect and need autonomy. They need to have things that they're responsible for. They need a space that they can control. We have this struggle for control, and who's going to win it? And so as a parent, we have a choice. We can go the authoritarian route, kind of the old-fashioned horse breaking, and just hold on for dear life until that horse is broken and submits to our will. And this sometimes is our go-to because many of us were raised with parents like this. We were raised with parents that said, this is my house, these are my rules, and you're just going to have to do what you're told and don't talk to me like that. And I'm all for respect. Students have to learn how to speak respectfully. They have to learn to be responsible. But the authoritarian route of breaking their will doesn't necessarily make them responsible people. Because that horse now, if we go back to our horse analogy, is only good if they have a rider. And we don't want our young people to need someone over them all of the time, giving them commands for what to do. We want our young people to take control of their own lives, of their own goals, of their own pursuits, of their own tasks, and be able to manage them themselves. And that is a completely different thing. So the other option that we have is that we can work as a team together towards success. And that's what I want to talk about today, is this horse whisperer analogy where we can talk to our young people in a way that will encourage them to be autonomous, in a way that's going to help them to actually develop the skills they need to be responsible for themselves, instead of us always pushing them to do the things that need to be done. And ideally, this is going to start young. with small things, and it will grow and develop as the student does. But sometimes we end up like 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, and we have this power struggle still happening, and the young person's not able to take over. And then it has to be a pretty quick and radical adjustment period, or it will last well into their young adulthood, or they're going to struggle with those skills later. And I think these are skills that many of us struggle with. Could you just tell me in the chat, what are the most difficult self-management skills you have? Because self-management is one of the important pieces, not only for our students, but for ourselves. How are you with your self-discipline? How are you with your self-control? And while you're doing that, I just also want to remind you, if you haven't got this book yet, I do recommend it. Very shamefaced that I wrote this book. It is how you can have student success on autopilot through training independence. So definitely go to the description and find the link for that. It's so difficult when they blast at us. Yes, not to blast back, not to like echo back their feelings. I'm very disciplined and organized, which is probably why I get frustrated. Oh, our organization gets disrupted. This was me. I am so organized, and I love for everything to be under control. I want to like manage things so everything's controlled all of the time, because when everything's under control, I'm under control. But when things get out of control, then I get out of control. I can manage myself when my life is under control. Self-discipline is so hard, so hard. So the way we do this with our young person, I just want to jump right in, because I know that's why you're here. You really want to know the actual things that you can do to help your young person. The very first thing I recommend is, first of all, to make a long-term plan before you start. So, figure out how you will use this before you jump right in. So don't, after this call, jump and, go do the A, acknowledge and apologize. Just figure out how you will use this process in your life and your student's life, and then work from there. I have an acronym, ARAS. The A is acknowledge and apologize. And I know this feels perhaps humiliating, or maybe even manipulative. Maybe you feel like maybe you don't really want to apologize, that you haven't really done anything wrong. But what we're acknowledging is to just sit down with our preteen or teen and say, listen, I think I've been treating you kind of like a kid, and you're growing up. And you deserve a little more respect for your age. So that means that I owe you an apology, because I've forgotten that, you're not a little kid anymore. And I know that you want to be responsible, and you want to really take control of your life and have some autonomy and independence. And that's normal, and that's good. And I don't want to take that away from you. So I'm sorry that I've been forgetting, because as a parent, it's hard to remember. It's hard to remember that our little baby is like growing up now. This allows our young person to see that it's normal, that they haven't done something wrong, because they're just going through the normal pieces of learning and growing and developing, that you recognize that they need this, and that it's what you want too, but that you're not perfect. And you don't expect them to be perfect either, because being perfect isn't the goal. So the first step is just to have that conversation with them. And what does that look like to them? How do they feel? How much autonomy do they want? What are they looking to have control over? You might find that they just want to be in control of their room. Okay, if they're young, start with one thing. Okay, be in control of your room. But if it's your room, then then you be in charge of it, and you be the boss of it, and you take care of it. You do the things that need to be done. So that's a piece of that. The next step, and this is a hard one, well, they're all hard, is to relinquish control. We want to be in control. We have always been in control. It's our house, it's our rules, it's the way that we have set it out. We're the ones who have made the plans, we're the ones who have made them happen. We're the ones who've made the rules and set the expectations. And it is really, really hard to give that up. Who likes control? Anyone? Just pop in the chat, let me know. Control, I did not realize that I loved control. I think that in the homeschool community, this is a fairly normal thing. It's almost expected, because if we choose to homeschool, it's because we want control of our children's education. So we're probably already that sort of person anyway. So relinquishing some control to our children is really hard, really, really hard. But it's so, so important, because if we have control, they don't. And they need some areas where they're responsible, so that they have to be in charge of those pieces of what's going on. They have to set out the plan. They have to make it happen. And then they have to take care of the consequences of that. So part of this is also to recognize and have them recognize it is your house. You do have rules. That's okay. You're still the manager. You're still the manager in your home. You still have expectations and things that need to be done, and things that need to be done by certain times and certain days. And those things have natural consequences. And I'm not so much talking about punishments. I'm not talking about grounding. I'm not talking about taking things away. I'm talking about the natural consequences of not completing a task. So if we say, from now on, you're going to be responsible to take care of this one subject. And it really depends on the age of your students, but you all have between the age of 12 and 15. So in that age group, the 15 is more on the upper end, but I think that probably he's needing a little bit more close monitoring. So relinquishing control means taking a piece and saying, you're responsible for this piece now. So in order to do that, you need to look at your homeschool plan for that piece, and you need to say, well, that means this has to be done by this date. So back up and set intermediate dates, then set intermediate weeks and say, every week you need to complete this many lessons, or every week you need to get to this space. And every day, maybe, you need to finish a certain number of things. So the younger they are, the earlier you want the deadlines. So you want short deadlines. So the younger they are, they need like days, or maybe even half days. Like, so a 10-year-old might need a half day. So by the time lunchtime comes, you need to finish these tasks. And by the time the school day is done, you need to finish these other tasks, so that they have that deadline. We're letting them do it. We're letting them be responsible, and we're just going to relinquish control of that. And that's hard. Really, really hard. I completely understand how hard that is, because control is a really big deal, a really big deal. And it's a really big deal for your young person, because in order for them to be confident in life, that they can do things, that they can set goals and meet them, they have to learn how to take control and manage those things. The next thing we have is accountability. So once you set out a piece that they are responsible for, you set up a time at which they will be accountable to have it done. So you might have morning meeting, or if they're very young, like maybe like 9, 10, you will want to have a morning meeting and a lunch meeting. Or if they're, as they become more and more responsible, you could have like just a meeting once a day. And then eventually, once they get into high school, it might be a meeting once a week. And if they're really good at managing their time, that might even extend to once a month. It really depends on your student. It really depends on their ability to push through and do those hard things. Because procrastinating is something that feeds itself. When we begin to procrastinate, we feel bad, and then we procrastinate more because we don't want to deal with it because we feel bad. So it's really important that you have these accountability times set up. And in those accountability times, you sit down and you say, so tell me. So this is sort of like, morning meeting at work. How are things going? How are you doing on your tasks? Did you complete the things that you needed to do? What have you learned about yourself? And we have to remember that success is not measured in perfectly finishing the schedule. Success is in growth. So the reward doesn't come when they have successfully made it through a whole day or a whole week of doing everything on the list. And that's what we want to do, because that's what we do with our young children, right? We say, you cleaned your room every day this week, so you got a sticker every day. So at the end of the week, you get this special treat. But when we're talking about these sorts of things, that is kind of a way towards discouragement. So what we want to do is we want to change our own mindset so that we see growth as success. We want to teach our young people that growth is success. So let's say yesterday they didn't quite finish. And today you're in your morning meeting and they say, well, yeah, I did terrible. I didn't finish. Well, how much did you do? Okay. What did you learn about yourself? What held you back from finishing it? Could you have done something different? And now today, how are you going to make sure that yesterday's work and today's work gets done? How are you going to change your plan? Because those are the skills that they need to develop in order to succeed. To realize that just because I failed yesterday doesn't mean it's done, it's over. I may as well just quit for the rest of the week because now I failed one day anyway, so I'm not going to get the reward at the end. It's really about, what did you learn about yourself? How can you avoid that in the future? Were you being distracted by YouTube? Were you being distracted by that book that you love to read? What are you going to do about that? How are you going to change that? It's not my job to make sure you do it. So how are you going to make sure you do it? How are you going to avoid those distractions? Those are the questions we want to be asking in accountability. So there's a big difference between other management, so being managed by someone else who's a taskmaster over you that makes sure that you do all of the things. And that is more like we think of when we think of a taskmaster, right? Someone with a whip that's like just waiting for you to step out of line. Get your eyes back on your book, right? That's not going to help them learn self-discipline because they always have an outside influence disciplining them. Is this making sense to you? Do you have any questions so far? Or maybe you're thinking this is just impossible.
This is bang on, Teresa. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Any questions? I don't want you to be discouraged because I know this is difficult. It sounds so simple. It is simple, but it's hard. Simple and easy are not the same. And here's the hardest part. So I wanted to prepare you before you see the next one, because this is the very hardest part. Shh. We have to bite our tongue. When they are procrastinating, when they are being distracted, when they are not doing their task, we need to stay out of it because it's not our job. It's their job. This is so hard. This is the hardest part of all because we're watching them struggle and fail, and we're not stepping in and rescuing them. When we rescue our young people, we teach them that they cannot do it themselves. But when we let them fail, we can help them to learn and grow and help them to realize that they can make a difference. They can change how they do it. They can find out what their own personal pitfalls are and then make a plan to avoid them or change that. This is how our young people can learn to see difficulty as a way to grow instead of allowing it to be a roadblock that just shuts them down. Because in life, when we come up to roadblocks, we can't just shut down and quit. We have to keep on going. We have to keep fighting through, and we have to find a way to make it work. And so often we're seeing in young adults, they're going into the workplace and they don't know what to do if things aren't easy. They don't know what to do if tasks are more than they can fit into their allotted time. They don't know how to assess a situation and really make a plan for it. And this is something employers are really looking for. So as we're being quiet, we want to be preparing things that we can say, because guaranteed it's going to come up. So the day ends and your young person says, can I go play with my friend? Or I'm going to the park now to play basketball. And we're tempted to say, I don't know, let me see your planner and I'll see if you can. But then who's in control? We're in control. We're deciding for them if they can go and play. But what if we say, oh, you must have finished everything. That's awesome. I'm so excited you finished everything. I didn't see your work handed in. Did you hand it in for me to grade? We're assuming the best, right? So one thing we could do is assume the best. And they don't like it if they have to say that your assumption is wrong, right? They want to live up to your best assumption. They want to live up to you believing that they did it all. So that's one possible thing, one idea of ways that we can come at this. Another idea is we can say things like, oh, well, did you look at your planner to see if you're ready to go? Or can I go play? I don't know. What does your planner say? Those kinds of questions put them back in the control seat and take us out of it. Those are the natural consequences. And I just have to point out here that unfortunately, the natural consequences of their actions are sometimes going to spill over on us. So maybe we had a coffee date with a friend and we were going to take them along to play with our friend's kid, but now our young person can't go because they haven't finished. Can we go? Unfortunately, when we fail or when we sin or when we do wrong, it spills over onto other people. And it's not just one person that pays the consequences. Sometimes entire families pay consequences for actions. So we have to be willing to allow those painful consequences to happen. Instead of saying, I know you were really looking forward to going to visit, and I was really looking forward to go to visit. How about we just go and visit and you can just do that another time, or you can just do that later. We have to allow those consequences to be painful. When we rescue them from those consequences, then it doesn't really help them to learn and grow. The fastest way for them to learn and grow is to feel the pain of the consequences. Okay, thoughts about that? Is that a bit heavy? What are you thinking? It's a hard thing. Yes, it is very hard. It is a hard thing to allow that. And so just now, can you just pop in the chat and tell me, how well equipped do you feel to do this? I think the hardest part is our own self-discipline. The hardest part of this is for us to give up our control. And I know that feels like a bait and switch. I said, come here today and I'm going to help you learn how to get your students started in self-management. And really it comes back to our own self-discipline. And it's so difficult to have that there. It is so hard to implement. And this is the one reason, thank you for sharing. This is the one reason that it's really helpful to start it when they're young, to start building these things, even at like 6, 7, 8 years old, to say, oh, you know what? That's really too bad we didn't get math done today because that's on our timetable. I guess we're going to have to stick around and do that. Sometimes I think as homeschoolers, we want to embrace the life so much that we forget. We forget that we have to be managing our timetable and we have to be self-disciplined because we're the example for that. This is a totally difficult thing to do. It's totally difficult to implement, and I understand that. So when we start at a young age and we're able to model that self-discipline early, then that really helps. But I don't want you to feel like all is lost. I've been there. I have had young children, and I don't know how many days I said, oh, forget it. Forget it. Let's just stop today. I'm done. I can't deal with this anymore. We're just going to stop and we're going to move on. Or we're going to go and we'll figure this out another time. And the advantage of homeschooling is that we can do that. But we also have to model the self-discipline to follow through and do hard things. So somehow we have to balance that. We have to balance embracing the homeschool life and options that we have with making the rest of the things happen and being an example of self-discipline and discipline in our homeschool. So don't feel as though if that's something you've struggled with in the past, that you can't set out and move on from here. You definitely can set out and move on from here. Since I have you here, I do want to share a little bit about my classes. I teach this in all of my classes. So this is one of the pieces that I teach in my classes. And what I did is I decided what goal I had and for my students. I decided where I wanted them to be by the end of grade 12. And I decided where I wanted them to be maybe after each term, not specifically, but what skills they would need to develop in order to be independent, confident, self-managed, self-disciplined, able to write, able to do critical thinking. And I teach that all through the writing process and through the literature and research process. So if that's something that you think would be helpful, definitely go check out any of my social media. And this video and many others is on the YouTube platform. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, and please do email me, support@discerntolearn.com, if I can help you further. Thank you so much for listening and for being here today.